Hey guys, all right, so for the synchronous session that we are scheduled to do for Thursday, what I wanted to do is to kind of go over really quickly what you guys are expected to do in task 3 as we're really diving into TKM, okay, To Kill a Mockingbird. So first things first, I want to kind of summarize everything that you guys have read so far and then help you guys dive in and really analyze that text in a little bit more detail before our next SOS session or our next big synchronous session. Okay, so let's kind of go over what you guys have read so far. So we have chapter 1. So chapter 1, you guys, that was last Friday. You guys were expected to read chapter 1, half of it on your own, half of it with me. And it's kind of just Scout remembering her childhood for the most part. But it's a lot of exposition, right? It's a lot about her talking about Maycomb and what it's like. It's her explaining the characters like Calpurnia, the housekeeper, Jim, her brother, Atticus, her dad, Dill, who is the neighborhood kid that kind of comes in for the summertime and then goes back to Mississippi and all of these things. And so she's really just kind of describing what it's like growing up in Maycomb. But over half of the chapter is looking at Boo Radley, right? This mythological, scary creature man that lives 2 doors down from her. So we learn a lot about Boo Radley and to why he's been locked up in his house, right? He was about 15, got into it with the wrong crowd, and his dad being very prideful and very stern. He's like, I will keep him, don't worry. Basically locked him in the house, threw away the key. And so a lot of chapter 1 is just her really explaining that and explaining to us that we know that she actually has never met Boo Radley, right? She's never physically seen him, neither has Jim, because he's been locked up in the house. And so we're going to definitely get to know a lot more about Boo Radley in the upcoming chapters. But this big event that happened where Jim went up and slapped the Radley house, right? We learned that nobody goes onto the Radley property. The dad only comes out like once a day to go get groceries. The mom, Mrs. Radley, rarely ever comes out, maybe just to sweep her porch. No one goes in, no one comes out very often. And so it's this very, very creepy, scary kind of setting that's kind of a very foreboding area aura kind of around this Radley house. And so Dill dares Jim to go up and slap the house. He slaps the Radley house. And it's kind of this little scary ending when they see the shutter move inside the house, right? And so it's her really kind of really setting us up, foreshadowing that this will continue to get a little creepy when it comes to the Radley property. All right, and then we have chapter 2. So quickly summarize chapter 2. So you guys read about Scout's first day of school. This was something that she was very, very excited about, right? We learned that Scout is very bright. She's very smart. She loves to learn. And so she was excited about school, but we quickly learned that she now hates school. She hates school because she got into trouble, right? She got into trouble twice before lunchtime on her first day of school. One was for being able to read. Now, Harper Lee does this because it helps to characterize Scout as being a naive narrator and really young. We know that it's great, right, if a 6-year-old can read, but Miss Caroline gets on to her and she's like, I'm the teacher, I haven't taught you that, so you can't know how to do it. And so Scout's like, yeah, that makes sense. I hate everything because I can read. But then she also gets in trouble for standing up for Walter Cunningham. Now, we learn a lot about the Cunninghams in chapter 2. We learned that they are poor country folk, much like most people in Maycomb, Alabama at the time, especially because we talked last week about the stock market crash, right? And we talked about how that would have hit everyone, not just people that were farmers. We even learned that Atticus and the entire Finch family is even quote unquote poor, is what kind of Harper Lee describes them as. But there's a different type of poor, and Atticus does a good job of kind of explaining this. It's like, no, we're poor, but the Cunninghams are country poor, and there's a little bit of distinction there. But Atticus, I feel like, does a really good job of explaining that. If the farmers don't have money, then the professionals don't have money because the farmers aren't going to the professionals. So kind of this wicked web we weave, if you will. And so basically, Walter Cunningham, he's used to not having lunch, and so Miss Caroline doesn't know the Cunninghams. She's not from Maycomb, and so she just assumes that Walter forgot his lunch, and so offers him a quarter. He won't take it because he knows that he can't pay it back. And Scott was trying to explain this to her teacher, and Miss Caroline kind of gets embarrassed. and gets onto Scout for embarrassing him in front of the class. Scout, again being naive, is like, oh, this is all Walter Cunningham's fault, and kind of gets onto him, kind of starts beating him up a little bit. And that's the beginning of chapter 3. So chapter 3 is when we see Walter come over for lunch. It's called dinner in the text, but if you watch the video where I'm kind of reading it, I kind of explained why that was called dinner and not lunch. But it was really common in the 1930s to go home for lunch and then back to school. It was something that a lot of kids did if you lived really close to the school, but if not, some kids did pack their lunch. But there wasn't like the cafeteria that we see now in lunch, okay? And so Walter was invited to go over to the Finch's house, which is Jim and Scott's last name, if you remember. So he went over to Finch's house for lunch, which would have been a big deal because he probably wouldn't have eaten lunch that day. He probably just got used to eating dinner with his family if his family caught something that day, like a rabbit or a squirrel, or had anything in the garden to cook. And so you guys did a really good job of analyzing this in part or in task 2 when I asked, why does Walter Cunningham pour that molasses all over everything, right? And Scout kind of gets onto him, like, what are you doing? Why are you pouring syrup all over your meat? Like, that's disgusting. And so you guys did a really good job of analyzing that, and that shows that Walter, it kind of helps characterize Walter as being poor, again, because he doesn't have access to those sweet things like you typically, like some other kids would. And so he's kind of overindulging a little bit because he's afraid that he won't get the opportunity to get something sweet like that again. But what's interesting about that interaction is we have Calpurnia getting onto Scout, which I thought was very, very interesting for Harper Lee. It actually helps characterize Atticus, that Atticus is comfortable enough to let somebody else kind of, discipline and kind of help steer his children. And so we learn there that Calpurnia actually has a very large role in the Finch family, right? She's not just the cook, she's not just the housekeeper, she's actually really helping kind of mold Scout and Jem into the people that they are. Scout hates it, because Cal gets onto Scout a little bit more, but it's all goodwill. Scout, kind of deserves it a little bit. She's very, very strong-willed. At the end of chapter 3, we do meet Burris Yule Jr. This is the only time we will meet this character. He's kind of like a stock character, but he's very, very important for the text. So the Yule family, we get to see a lot about them in chapter 3. Again, these first few chapters are all exposition. It's all just kind of explaining the characters and getting to know the characters and getting all that background that's necessary in order to understand the text later on. At the end of part 1 and then into part 2. So we have Burris Yule Jr., and so he basically has lice popping out of his hair. Miss Caroline, she's from northern Alabama. She's not used to country folk, as she says. And so she's like freaking out. She's like, oh, go home and wash your hair. That's disgusting. And Burris Yule basically cusses her out, makes her cry. And we learn, kind of the Yule family. They don't go to school. They're not educated. They're very hateful. They're mean. Their dad's a drunk. He's abusive. He spends all of their money that they have on whiskey. And so, they don't really think that the law applies to them. And so it's interesting. I like to always look at the comparison between Walter Cunningham and Burris Yule Jr., right? And I like to compare them because they're very different. Even though socioeconomically they're the same, their pride is very, very different, right? And how they kind of personify that out into the world. And so the very end of this chapter is really important because Atticus is talking to Scout about prejudice and empathy, and this is kind of setting the foundation for the rest of the story. So what's happening in this chapter is that Scout is very frustrated. She doesn't want to go back to school. She's like, it's the worst thing ever. Get me out of here. And so Atticus really teaches her, and I love the way he brings it down to a 6th grader or to a 6-year-old's level, because empathy and prejudice, those are very, very hard topics to learn when you're a 1st grader. And so Atticus does a really good job of kind of bringing that down onto her level. And he says, look, Scout, if you could walk around in somebody's shoes, and kind of walk around in their skin a little bit, you'll have a lot better idea of what their intention was and what they were actually thinking about. And so this allows Scout to really think, okay, so Miss Caroline, let me think about it. Her perspective, it's the first day of school. She's a teacher. She's never taught before. She's got all these kids that she doesn't know what to do with, right? And so she's got all of this new transition that's happening with her. She's scared. She's nervous. And so what is she going to do? She's going to lash out, right? That's her defense. And so it allows Scout to kind of get to see empathy in a new way, which is a hard thing to do. And Scout's not perfect. She will continue to learn this kind of throughout the book. This is the first time we really see Atticus teach her about understanding different people's perspectives. He even continues on talking about the Yule family and how the Yule family doesn't get arrested for like hunting out of season and things like this because the law kind of turns the blind eye. The law does this because if they were to arrest Burris Yule for hunting squirrels out of season, then his family wouldn't eat. And he's like, Atticus says, do you really think it's fair to make the kids not eat because their dad is an alcoholic? And so, it's kind of teaching his kids that gray area, which is interesting for Atticus because he kind of continues on. Kind of carrying out the law for the underdog later in the text when we're looking at Tom Robinson. All right, and then chapter 4. So chapter 4 is a very short chapter, which you guys would have read last week or this week. But this is when Scout starts to find all of the tree gifts that are on the Radley lot. And so she gets out of school like 30 minutes earlier. And so she gets out of school, she goes, she's walking home. We know the Radley house is 2 doors down from hers, and she finds a piece of gum that's in a knot hole in the tree. And she decides to eat it. Now, I cannot stress this enough. If you find gum on the side of the road, please do not eat it. Please do not ingest it. Again, this kind of shows Scout as being a little kid. And she's like, oh, candy, I can eat that. That's great. And so, Jim gets on to her, like, spit that out. First of all, don't do that. Second of all, you found that in the Radley house. Are you insane? You cannot eat that. But what's interesting is they continue to kind of find these things in the tree, right? They find the Indian coins that are very expensive, right? It's not like finding a penny on the sidewalk. These are something that are treasured. So the reader starts to ask yourselves these questions like, wait, why? Why are they finding these things? We know that nobody goes into the Radley house, so who's hiding them on the Radley property? Everyone's afraid of the Radley house. So we have to ask ourselves, who's putting this stuff in the tree? Why are they putting this stuff in the tree? Is it meant for the kids to take it out of the tree? Are they going to get in trouble? So, all of these questions should be coming to your mind as you're reading this. Later on in chapter 4, we learn that the kids are getting bored with their summertime games, and so they make up a game called the Boo Radley game. And so in this game, the Boo Radley game, this is when they basically are just playing out the narrative of the gossip that they've heard about Boo Radley, right? Well, Atticus gets onto the kids about making fun of Boo, and he kind of protects Boo Radley, or Arthur Radley as he calls him. He's like, you guys don't know him. That's incredibly rude. That's selfish. Don't do that. That is, completely unheard of to kind of be that prejudiced against somebody like Boo, especially because you don't even know him. And so the kids don't really listen to him. We'll kind of see that later in the chapters. But Atticus does get onto the kids for making fun of Arthur or Boo Radley. But what's interesting is the way this chapter ends. I love the way chapter 4 ends as well, just like chapter 1. And if you remember, Scout gets into that tire and she's rolling down the hill, and she gets out, she runs away. But at the end of that chapter, we learn that Scout actually hears somebody in the Radley house laughing. And so again, this is Harper Lee doing a really good job of really creating this foreboding, aura around this Radley house, and it's scary. Like, why are they laughing? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, think about it in a horror movie. If you see a little clown laughing, I think that was the kind of mood that she's wanting to set to kind of set the stage right there. Okay, so it's very, very scary. And Scout's kind of even more creeped out, like, so they're alive, right? Because we have Jim earlier in the book. He's like, yeah, I think he's dead. He stepped up the chimney. He's fine. But we learn that's not actually the case. Somebody in there is definitely still alive. Okay, so what I want you guys to do today is I want you guys to log in and do the boxes that are in Thrivist, okay? So let's kind of go over these boxes, and I'll kind of show you guys how to upload it into Thrivist, okay? So what I did is I took all of the main skills that I want you guys to look at with this chapter, and I've kind of broken them down. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to look at is the setting. So where does this take place? What is the setting of the novel? choose the quote that shows a good description of Maycomb. This would be best found in the very, very first paragraph after that big, preface that Harper Lee kind of writes. She does a really good job of kind of painting the picture of what Maycomb looks like, and then explain Maycomb in your own words based on this quote. So I want you to look at, finding point of view and perspective, looking at important interactions between the characters. Now, some of these things you guys have actually already answered in your earlier tasks, which I did so very purposefully because I want you guys to really focus on this question, which what does it reveal about the relationship? So if you look back at your tasks that you did earlier, you actually already have the answers to this question because I really want you to be able to analyze why is that an important interaction between these two characters, okay? And so the same thing for chapter 2, since chapter 2 is really short, I really just want you to look at how the event that happens between Miss Caroline and everything that happens with the first day of school, how does that help characterize Scout? Chapter 3 is looking at characters in theme. Okay, so again, we've already talked about the important interaction between Scout and Atticus in this chapter, and this was in your task 2. But again, I want you to focus on what does it reveal about the relationship. Okay, and then I want you to look at the theme of prejudice, the theme of bravery, and then again with chapter 4. Okay, so pick out a quote that shows bravery, and then what is the author trying to teach you, the reader, about prejudice? Okay, and this is just 1 to 2 sentences. So when you're done, you're going to submit this URL into Thrivus. So remember, you'll go up to the share button. You will click down here where it says restricted. You need to change that to anyone in Wilson County, or you can do anyone with link. Either one of them, it will get to me. And then you will click copy link and then go and submit that into Thrivus. Okay, so you do not have to share it with me. You just have to copy the link and make sure that is unrestricted, and you will upload this into Thrivus. Okay, so I know several of you guys have also signed up for SOS. We're not going to do SOS this week, but I am meeting with students individually. If you want to meet with me individually, please just reach out by email and I can get that set up for you guys. Okay. All right, so I hope this is helpful. Next week, we're going to be looking at chapters 5 through 8, which is phenomenal. I'm so excited, and I hope you guys are really liking the book so far. All right, we'll talk soon. Bye.